Annika,
Yeah.
Annika.
Yeah, she read it to you while I was driving.
Great.
Right, you have the house on Lake, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we don't really have any site plans or anything like that. We're discussing, we're just talking about economic development strategy.
Well,
Well, there you go.
there you go. Architecture. Give us some design planning.
She has a younger one, and then she has a
Good to be
boy.
on it as well.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, they're good people.
Hello.
How are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm well. thank you.
How old are you? Good on? Good.
Was there?
All meeting, right?
Did you have a good turnout for that tour?
Yeah. Yeah, we were there till 1, I think, yeah. And it was constant, so lots of them, just, Leo was there. A lot of other people that I threw, you strangely, those people asked me what I'm from. Oh yeah, we lived in Australia every year. Yeah, just a great way.
Broadcasting?
Let me make sure we are unmuted. Yes, good.
Great. All right, well, let's bring this meeting to order. This is the meeting of the City of Harbor Springs, Michigan Planning Commission. Today is Thursday, October 17th, 2024. And it's 5:30 p.m. local time. And Jeff, would you like to call roll for us?
Absolutely. Rick Tarczynski,
Here.
Vanessa Warren,
Here.
Tony Johnson,
Yeah.
Bill Mulder,
Here.
Mark Burdett,
Here.
Barry Lustgarten,
Here.
Nancy Rondell.
Here.
We have a quorum.
We have a quorum, all right. Next thing on the agenda is review of the minutes from the September 19th, 2024 meeting. Have people taken a look at that?
I did.
I have one correction, Jeff. Under B closed session. Says Raymer noted he had prepared a memorandum for DISC. DISC,
Uh-oh.
could be disc golf, could be discussion, could be
Discussion,
public discussion.
discussion about the.
Anybody else have any corrections or additions?
No, sir.
All right. How about a motion to approve minutes from the September 19th meeting?
I'll move to accept them with the correction. Noted.
With the correction, we have a motion on the table to approve the minutes with that correction. Do we have a second?
Second.
We'll say Rick Tarczynski second.
All right. It's kind of at the same time.
Yeah.
All
All
right.
right, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Right. Motion passes. All right, next thing on the agenda is public comment or correspondence. And for those that are joining us online and in the room, this is the time when you can address the planning commission about any ideas or concerns that you have on a topic that's not on tonight's agenda. And the only thing on tonight's agenda is the economic development strategy. So, do you have any thoughts for us? Anything we should know? Watch outs, ideas, concerns? Nope. We have two people on the line.
Yep, if you're on Zoom and would like to make a comment, please raise your Zoom hand.
Okay, let's move on to the main item on the agenda, which is discussion of the economic development strategy draft. That was part of our package. And Victor, for people who are online or will be watching later, where would they find a copy of this so they could look at it?
We have a draft copy in two places. One is on our homepage on our website. And a second could be in person. If you want to get an in-person copy, we can have it, or they can email us.
We can send it to them. So folks online or folks viewing later, please take advantage of that so you can see what it was we were talking about tonight. And perhaps during our discussion, Victor can scroll to the particular page if it's a clear line to do that. So folks in the room can see that as we go along. Okay, great. So Victor, what do you need from the planning commission or what is RRC?
Yeah, okay, so I can talk a little bit about process and the needs here. So as you know, the RRC has several best practices, and one of them is to develop an economic development strategy. We've pretty much met all the best practices. We have a couple left to work on, and this is one of them, an economic development strategy. It's a community-driven strategy. There's no input from other people on what needs to be in there. We're developing it as a community, and then we send it over to see if it meets the best practice. And so that's what we did here at this stage. That the RRC committee has prepared this, worked on this for several months. And this is something normally most cities usually pass on to consultants or staff to do, but of course we're a small staff, so we set up the RRC committee to work on these bigger things that we can then pass along to our other boards and commissions for review and input, and then ultimately to council. So at this stage, the RRC put together a draft. That draft was presented to the DDA. The DDA had some comments, no changes, but just some positive comments about some of the goals and tactics, projects. And then it's coming to the planning commission because I believe, and I think for the law, that all plans that go to council should come to planning commission first to ensure that they conform with the goals and intent of the master plan. So really what the planning commission goals here is not so much to, well, they can if they want to put the details, but really to make sure that the goals and tactics and projects in here align with the goals of the master plan. And I do have some of the goals here. They're on, if you have them out, they're also on page 7 through 14 of the master plan. I didn't put them in this packet, but they're in the master plan, and I can go through some of the goals here. So I envision going through just an overview of what the economic development strategy is, some of what I think are the relevant goals, and then planning commission having a discussion on if they see the economic development strategy being in line with those goals, if they think there should be other goals or tactics and projects in here. I can tell you the basis where we started for this economic development strategy was looking at the master plan goals and at the downtown development, downtown vision plan from 2012. So that was a little outdated, so we didn't rely on that as much, but we looked at both documents because they both had to do with economic development. So you will probably already find a lot of similarities to the master plan and goals in here because that was our template that we started out with. That just made sense. Why reinvent the wheel when we already have economic development goals in here? So yeah, and that's after this, it'll, we'll make any revisions necessary. It is open for public comment. That's why I posted it online. I will send something to Harbor Light, just so there's a notice that people can also submit public comment on the plan. And then it'll go to council probably sometime in November for approval.
Okay.
So if there's any questions about the process, we can go talk about any questions about the process. All right, yeah, okay.
Nope, doesn't sound like.
All right, yeah. So the economic development strategy, this is, pretty, I would say pretty bare bones. You have a lot of communities that have strategies that are, 40, 50, 60 pages long with graphs and pictures and fancy stuff. This is bare bones. We didn't spend money other than some staff time on this. So, but we believe gets to the meat of what we want, basic information, demographics, vision, goals, and how we're going to achieve those goals. So as you see the table of contents, that's how it's broken down. It's broken down where we are now, where we want to be, which is our vision and goals, and how do we get there, which is our projects and tactics. I won't focus too much on the demographics, but because we base them on the master plan and some updated demographics that I got from Jeff. For example, from Jeff, I got the state equalized value in 2023 to 2024, which obviously is not in the 2022 master plan. So we have that data to show that, the cost of homes have increased 80% in the past 5 years. So, it's kind of an important part when you'll notice later, one of our challenges we identify in the master plan is housing. And so that's why I thought it was important to add that part to the plan. A thing that we did is we looked at assets and elements of the city. You could probably phrase this different ways, but really this is looking at, what does the city already have in it that people want and need, right? And we broke it down in different categories. You see this first category is public services and amenities. There's some discussion about how to break this down. This is maybe not the perfect just breakdown, but it gets the message across that, you know, we have public services, you know, you can consider police, fire, water, internet. And by public services, we don't necessarily mean just that the government's giving these services, but they're available to the public at large. You know, you got telephones, Wi-Fi, we got recycling, compost, and some other things. So that's one category. We identify what we do have. Then we identify what we don't have. We don't have public, this doesn't mean we necessarily need it or want it, but this is just something other communities have that we could potentially have here. We're talking about public art, public transportation, higher education, healthcare, and a veterinarian. These are services that are generally in other communities, but depend on the community size, right? We have a higher education in Petoskey. That doesn't mean we need a higher education in Harbor Springs, but we were just saying what things that we don't have, that other communities tend to have. Then we talked about parks and recreation amenities. We went through a whole list there. Things that we don't have. Ice rink, we used to have one, we don't have an ice rink. A recreation center, an indoor center. You can say the high school has a little bit of that, but it's a little different than when we think of municipal recreational centers. Pavilions and a bike path, which is something that we're working on. Dog park, splash pad, RV park, shuffleboard.
Would Kiwanis Park be considered recreation center?
We're talking about an indoor center. It's, you know, there's a little, they house birthday parties and they can do activities in there, but you know, when we talk about these recreational centers in some other communities, they have like basketball courts and like different things inside, gyms. So that was more of the intent. When it comes to culture, entertainment, and dining, we identify what we have, talked about what we either don't have or are underrepresented. So when I say what we don't have, it's either we have them, but they're underrepresented or they're not represented at all. So food trucks, comedy club, activity businesses like the bowling alley, but I think we have one just outside of town. Tea shop, rooftop dining, brewery, distillery. So, you know, that's another thing that was hard to really quantify here. We talked about this in the committee was, all right, we have some amenities and services that are nearby, 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes. They're not necessarily inner city. So we might not necessarily need them here. But we were trying to focus on what we have in the city because this plan is focusing on what's in the city. But we do want to note that there is, like we talked about a bowling alley, there is one 3.5 miles away. So we don't want to, you know, say we necessarily need one in here because there's one. Same thing with a hospital. We have one that's 15 minutes away. We don't need per se a hospital in Harbor Springs. Same idea with retail and lodging, and retail amenities. We talked about, you know, we don't have a music shop or a thrift store. Talked about hotels being kind of underrepresented. One is one, but for the most part, we don't have a lot of places for people to stay, which has kind of been part of the short-term rental discussion. They all tie in together. Commercial services, similar things there. So those are assets and elements, you know, and one of the reasons you put these things in there is because let's say you're applying for a grant, an infrastructure grant, and your economic development strategy has goals related to some of these amenities and services that you have. You identify that you have these services, but that you're weak on maybe internet or Wi-Fi or fiber optic, you're weak on something that's why you're applying for a grant for that. We have a plan to show that we have these services, but we don't have these services. It also could be if we're looking at, if a business is looking to locate in Harbor Springs, they're like, oh, I want to locate, you know, a salon here. Then they realize like, oh, they already have several salons. It might not be the best place for me to open a salon. So it's also a way for businesses to look at and be like, what is missing in the city? What's already there? So there's kind of a twofold thing. It's the one that serves the community for seeking grants, but it also serves businesses that are looking to potentially locate their business here. Any questions on that section?
Victor, we talked about Bay Bluffs. Do you want to put that in the public service part?
Yeah, I think that's and you had mentioned that it was
It's called a long-term care facility,
long-term care.
which is different than an assisted living facility. And I happen to think it's a big part, a real draw for some people for this community. Also, people could look that were looking to move here, not necessarily open a business, but we're thinking about moving here to see what we had and what was important to them to have close by.
And that was actually a good exercise for us, is when we went through this as a committee, Vanessa, Jeff, when we went through this as a committee, we noticed like, wow, we have a lot of stuff here that, for a small town, there's a lot in Harbor Springs. And so if someone's looking at me, they're like, wow, they got this theater, they have these businesses that, may be good for my family, or the long-term care facility for older people. So it's, I think, it shows a wide breadth that businesses captures. I think that's a good point.
Victor, on page 4, under median household income. The final sentence, the city's assessment role tells a different story with only 32% of homes claiming a homestead. I don't understand that sentence, because we do have, a certain level of homes that are occupied all year round, but they might not necessarily have homestead because of the income that they have. Not everybody that lives in a house all year round can claim homestead,
Right.
because if they make too much money, and I would guess that that's the discrepancy between, what was it, 54% and the 32%.
We should probably change the word homestead to principal residence. Homestead is, the homestead exemption is an exemption on property or on income taxes.
And there is a level on it, and
Yeah.
it decreases as your income.
What we're actually referring to here is property owners get the option in Michigan to claim their principal residence exemption, which is an exemption of up to 18 mills of school operating that is part of their property taxes. And it's a good way to tell how many people are claiming residency in the city of Harbor Springs. And that's what that 32% is.
So I should change that word from homestead to principal residence.
Principal
Yeah.
residence.
Is
Yeah.
that-
And you made a good point there too, but there's also a flip to that, where we have a lot of residents, we have a certain amount of residents who claim principal residence exemption that might only be here 6-7 months of the year anyway. So they might vote here and claim their exemption here, but in the wintertime, they're somewhere else too. So it's like a kind of a both, it works both ways. So the numbers aren't complete, it's hard in a resort town, as a seasonal community like this, and with long year-round residents. There's a mix of those different kinds of residents. It's kind of hard to reflect those in the numbers. It's really hard to get numbers that really reflect. We have such a transitional population, and it's hard to target when people are here and when they're not here. So that's a good point, right? So, but I'll change that to that one.
And related to the, go ahead, Rick, sorry.
The other question I had was talking about Bay Street and putting more businesses down there. And that was one of the biggest prickling points for people that didn't like our new zoning code, because we turned that section into commercial. And they were afraid that something like this was gonna happen, that houses would be, people would be pushed out of their houses and businesses go into that section of town. And this seems like a lightning rod for, for the future. Because that whole section of town was really up in arms. When they came to our meetings and council meetings, in fact, they just didn't want that to be a commercial area, and it looks like that was done to fit into this.
That's on page 8. We haven't gotten there yet, but that's something that we're moving into next. So I think that's good that Rick brought that up. I don't know if you want to move to that next, Bill. You want to get to that, or do you have another? comment?
Wherever the conversation takes
Okay,
us.
all right. So that's the next section, which is opportunities. And I can tell you, and maybe we can reflect this differently in the wording, but part of the intent of the community looking at this was not necessarily to convert homes that are there to. It was, we have some buildings that are kind of not in the best shape, and that aren't housing businesses right now on Bay Street between Main and I think it's Spring, right? There's a couple buildings there that are not in great shape. And
Within
we
the
could-
DDA.
Yeah, within a DDA that we could improve, we could potentially revitalize some of these buildings that are not really in shape. So I think we could maybe word it so we're
Word that better to set that off. But it doesn't seem like that's a real viable area. I mean, how many restaurants have been in that one spot?
Yeah.
And that's what we discussed. We thought that it
could be a very viable area. Perplexed a lot of times why it isn't, and that the buildings are becoming a little more run down. And we have representative from the DDA. The DDA has a real interest in revitalizing that block, but we really didn't go beyond that block. We were really talking about
Well,
that.
the way it reads, it's
It's like the whole
Yeah, the
Main Street corridor. And we've been working on this. How long have we been doing this? We've been working on this for a long time.
Since the winter.
So a lot of this was even done before some of that even came. So
Yeah,
we're dynamic and we're learning and growing with a lot of the things that come up as well.
Yeah, definitely. We've been working on this since the winter, so.
Yeah.
Concurrently with the zoning code. So that's a good point you make. I think it should be clear that what we're talking about is not, it's to insert businesses where their businesses could be already right now. So it's a good point. The other couple opportunities that we identified is downtown, the 3rd Street section. So maybe I could even clarify with Bay Street, we're talking about downtown Bay Street as opposed to the whole Bay Street. I clarified here, it's downtown 3rd Street, we're talking about between Main and Gardner, right? You know, that section could use a little more sprucing up. Actually, they just did it with having some new light fixtures. But the real purpose for pointing out Bay Street and 3rd Street was they are part of our downtown. But people tend to skip them over and go to Main Street because that's where, and which can be fine for some people, but they're also part of the downtown. There are businesses, there are opportunities there. One is you walk down from the boardwalk on 3rd Street and you enter 3rd Street. There's parking spaces there, there's parking lots, you know, it's a prime opportunity to draw people there, as well as with Bay Street, there's a big parking lot of people are coming from the boats, right? So they're tending to walking past those parts of Bay Street and 3rd Street to get to Main Street, which is something that the committee talked about was these areas are part of our downtown. We should emphasize, should spruce them up so that they have some elements that make them feel like they're active and there's pedestrian life there, right? And that's also important for the businesses that are located. We have several businesses on 3rd Street and we have some businesses on Bay Street. So anyway, yeah, we're developing some properties there, revitalizing some areas, adding, you know, the proper touches like benches or trees or whatnot that need to go there. Those are all things we can do to improve Bay Street and 3rd Street. Another thing we talked about is arts and culture. And especially, you know, that Harbor Springs is home to many artists, many musicians, you know, from Bliss Fest to art shows. We have all kinds of things going on in the area. And it could be a strength along with recreation. Recreation is a big strength in the area, and a pull to be arts and culture. And, you know, for example, one thing we talked about is Ottawa Stadium. This is owned by the city, although the school plays sports on it during the school session. We could have events there. You know, we have historically many decades ago have held events there, but we just haven't done it recently. So that could be an opportunity where the school in the off season, when there isn't school stuff going on, the city's like, all right, we got this avenue venue. Let's do something there. Other thing we talked about is public art. We have an example of public art is right here by City Hall. We have the children saluting the flag. We have 1 or 2 pieces elsewhere, but we notice that there are, you know, either areas where we could have light touches of public art. We talked about potentially murals on some buildings. The spillway could use some mural. We talked about artwork under the spillway. So there's areas where we could and just sprucing up with public art. Public art draws people and it also adds to the community. So that's something we'll talk about. And then of course, emphasizing the recreation theme that we have here, several parks and ways to capitalize on that. That's an opportunity. We can keep on capitalizing on recreation. Education, we are home to the middle school, high school, and elementary school and daycare. I mean, we have all the area schools are in our city, so we should capitalize on that too. Recognize also that, you know, a lot of our employees in the city are people who work at the school. We tend to think of downtown, but something we talked about at the committee is that, yeah, a lot of our employees are actually in the school, which are probably one of our biggest, if not our biggest employer here. So something to keep in mind there. And of course, history. We do have 3 museums. One is, well, technically 2. The city owns 2 of the buildings. The The one where the Historical Society is right now, that's former City Hall. We own that building. The Historical Society leases it from us to use as a museum. We have the Andrew J. Blackburn Museum. And then the Historical Society purchased or has the Shea House that they're turning into a museum as well. And of course, we have Shea Park, which we have put the AHA boat, and the locomotive will be there soon too. So we have this little area, and there's a strong interest in history in this area. And I think utilizing those resources more to draw people in and to educate our own residents about the history of Harbor Springs is an opportunity. Any thoughts on opportunities before I get to challenges?
If I could go back one, I'm just going through this one of thought back on page 7, culture and entertainment. There are a large number of summer outdoor performances, street music, Sunday music in the park. I think that's something that could be added in there.
So as far as something that's present, such as events, chamber music events.
Yeah.
Chamber sponsor.
Do we want to say anything about encouraging small business? Do we say anything in the master plan about that specifically? I can't remember.
I don't recall that, and
I don't think we specify small.
Okay,
should the city be defining
well, we can
ownership?
encourage small businesses in different ways, in a
That
number
might
of
be
ways.
Good in the projects, goals, tactics section.
Okay,
I'm thinking if you're thinking about a goal, let's get to that. and
yeah,
maybe-
just, yeah,
I think that's a good thought. Yeah, it might be a spot there.
And before we move to the next section, I just want to tell the people in the room and the folks online, we will definitely open it up for your thoughts in just a minute when Victor gets done with the summary.
Yeah. I'm taking my time here because we have nothing else on the agenda. Just joking. Challenges, all right, housing. This has been, probably a constant theme for the several years, as well as in the area. It's noted many of our jobs are in education or service and retail, and employers are often searching to find employees to meet those jobs. And so that's a challenge that we have here. Summer parking, we've specifically specified summer parking as opposed to parking in general, because it's been noted that it's really certain weeks, times in the summer when we just have parking issues. And how to address those in the summer, if they can be addressed, is something we're talking about. Population demographics, and this one was more geared toward that as the median age gets older, it's harder to fill in jobs for employers. So like they have less of a pool to pick from. Retired people tend to do more volunteer work. Sometimes they work part-time. There's just less people to choose from for some of the jobs. So bringing people in that can, fill these jobs, fill these services, whether it's Bay Bluffs or, the downtown stores, restaurants, servers, whatnot. That was kind of what was on the committee's mind here, was that we need a sustainable population so we can support each other. Technology communications, this one has been brought up, not just for the committee, but for residents, having reliable technology infrastructure. It's not necessarily infrastructure from the city, such as our electric department. We always get, high praise when our electric department, but I think we're really talking about internet, cell phone reception, and some things like that, when people may be wanting to relocate their business here or want to work remotely and live here, but they can't because they're like, well, it's pretty bad internet reception or pretty bad cell phone coverage. So things we necessarily can't solve, but identifying them can help us think of some solutions.
And the committee believes we have poor internet service.
I think they have limited, we don't have fiber, for example, in the city limits. We only have one provider, I think. In the city limits.
Most areas only have one provider.
But, some areas both have, like Great Lakes Energy provides fiber in the townships, for example, fiber, while Charter Spectrum provides what they provide. So it's not just the provider, but it's what that provider offers. Several years ago, someone came to us and be like, oh, you guys can run your own fiber. Department, be your own fiber provider. And the cost to do that initially on our own is multi-million dollars, right? We don't want to be in that business. But that is a request that I've received multiple times from people in 5.5 years I've been here is bad internet, not enough internet, or not good enough internet, not fast enough speed, a download, upload speed. Those are things that I've heard regularly from people.
Students still struggle in high school to get good internet. to do
In
homework.
city, because mine just got increased to 400 meg.
I'll
Right.
send them to your place.
Try using your cell phone to access the internet
Yeah.
on the week of the 4th of July.
Yeah.
It doesn't work.
Well, even home internet, even the 400 plan will slow down in the middle of summer too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, this extra key service, but it's not bandwidth.
All right,
I know Great Lakes was expanding out other than places that they handle as far as energy. I don't know if that's something that we can have a conversation with them to see.
No, yeah,
True stream.
true story. I don't think they've,
They've provided that. That's basically it's fiber down every street where they have their electric lines. So, but they then didn't go into where they don't have electric lines, like City of Petoskey and City of Harbor Springs.
I know they've had some others.
another thing we identified is a changing climate, and we talk about potentially fluctuating water levels as being one that could impact, first of all, shoreline homes and businesses and parks, with high, we obviously heard from Beckett and Rader, the presentation a few months ago about what, the new, if the once in a 1,000-year floods are becoming more like a once in a 100-year floods, and once in a 100-year floods are becoming more like once in 20 years. So these shoreline flooding things could really impact our economy and our infrastructure. So that's one thing, water levels. And then warmer temperatures could impact how the ski hills do business, and how they bring in business. We already seen few snowmobilers come in the last few winters, hardly any ice fishers because the bay is not freezing over. So the winter recreation is potentially changing because of that warming winter. And how does that gonna affect how our businesses survive? Are people still gonna come up here in the wintertime to do those activities or to do other activities and support our businesses? Our businesses, what we heard at the DDA is they're surviving on a 3-month margin, like, June, July, August, maybe July, August, September, depending on the business, gets them through the whole year. That business in the winter really, is kind of vital for them making it or breaking it. So yeah, how does a changing climate affect that? How does fluctuating water levels impact business and our residents?
Do we need to say anything about electricity, the brownouts, since we're planning to put a substation in? Do we need to mention that in this?
I
or-
think since it's going in, it's no longer a challenge.
Okay.
But that's my,
Okay, it was just a thought of another thing that, because of the higher demand on our.
that was something identified back in 2006, 2005, so. But no, it's a good point. It is something that is being addressed.
What about water and sewer? Are there any concerns there with our expanding growth?
So if Lucas has looked from the city's perspective, water and sewers is not an issue. Could add several hundred more homes for water and sewer. There's one location in town that's pretty much already developed. That's kind of that Harbor Point and Glen Drive, that area, Traverse Street. They are kind of maxed out for sewer, but the rest of the town is capable of handling a lot more units. What we're running into though is some of the sewer authority we're one member of many. So in the summertime, just like with electricity, they run into the same problem is that, depending on the use in the summer, there's only so much that can handle. And they've been talking probably for a decade plus now on, expanding their sewer, their fields there to handle the sewers. But as far as what we can handle, we can process it. We have no problem. We can process it and send it there. And some of the infrastructure there is a little old too. But from our perspective, no, we can handle. All right, so Nancy, I guess we're getting toward what you were now talking about, where our vision and our goals. So, we have a nice vision statement here. I won't read it all. It's pretty lengthy, but we spent one whole meeting working on this one.
And beyond.
Yeah, it's, you know, there's a lot in there, but it kind of encompasses, what we think where we need to be. We focused on, you know, a balancing of the needs and interests, you know, full-time residents while recognizing we're a resort recreation community. I mean, that's much of our county comes from that. So I think the last sentence kind of strikes home: the city will foster a community where everyone feels like it. That's kind of the vision. The goals, we kept 4 goals. Of course, there's several goals in the master plan and the downtown vision plan, but the 4 goals we focused on were: Harbor Springs will be comprised of viable, community-oriented establishments that foster and recognize the city's resort and recreation theme. Number 2, Harbor Springs will be home to a diverse mix of businesses and industries, effectively developed and maintained, providing meaningful employment opportunities, augmenting the character of the community. Number 3 is Harbor Springs will have a robust year-round economy offering diverse services and goods. And then Harbor Springs will increase its total number of year-round residents and strive for a balanced age structure, more in line with the state's median age. So, Nancy, when you suggested small business could fit in one, you can mention it. You can
Yeah,
add
well, it would be, I would think it would be included in diverse mix of
Number 2,
businesses.
yeah,
Yeah, I would think that would cover.
okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So those are the goals, and those goals are based out of the tactics and projects that we've outlined. Some of these are already in the works, or already been suggested, and other ones are just ones that the committee came up about. So the first category is planning and policy.
You know what, why don't we,
Oh, sorry, go back to
why don't
the
we pause there for a minute? And let's get any more questions from the planning commission and from the public, or ideas?
And maybe it's a good time to also say the economic development goals that are in the master plan.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
yeah, why don't you remind us?
Yeah,
of
so I won't read all the tactics with the goals, but the goals for the economic development section of the master plan. One is Harbor Springs will be comprised of viable community-oriented establishments that foster and recognize the city's resort and recreation. So that number 1 goal is pulled, our economic development strategy pulled from that goal. And then number 2 goal is also pulled from the master plan. Harbor Springs will be home to a diverse mix of businesses and industries, attractively developed and maintained, et cetera, et cetera. So those are the 2 economic development goals. Each have about, you know, a half a dozen or so objectives aligned with that. So the other 2 goals that we added then were number 3 was Harbor Springs will have a robust year-round economy. So the focus was there to emphasize a year-round economy is important for our residents and important for our businesses, that we have year-round services and goods available. And then talking about that sustainable population, right? Having an employee base to pick from, having our schools survive or be, you know, not just a fraction of what they are today because we don't have, you know, kids going into school. So those discussions were brought up, I think, for those 2 goals.
All right, well, yeah, why don't we pause there and let's go to folks in the room. Does anybody have any thoughts on what you heard? Any ideas, suggestions about our assets, and you know what else we need? Anything that you would pass on to the RRC committee?
I'm a remote worker and I did experience this last summer really slow internet, was not able to do video conferencing with my clients. And the cell phone service was also, it sounds like everybody's experienced that, but I do. Yeah.
Could you just state your name
Yeah,
for the?
introduce.
Thank you.
Chris Heiner, what's your address? Where do you live?
On East Lake Street.
Okay,
That's good.
thank you.
I should mention that we also, John Michaelangeli suggested that we have a goal related to housing. We identify housing as a challenge, but that we don't have a goal directly related to it. So one of one of the things he mentioned is to talk about how, what a master plan as a goal, is basically, city zoning code should allow for different housing options. Aside from just traditional single family homes, accessory dwelling units, duplexes, smaller lot sizes, et cetera, should be housing. So I put in a temporary goal for that. I assumed it would be jive with the master plan, the planning commission's goals with zoning code we just updated. So
Right. Is there anybody online who'd like to say anything about what we've talked about so far?
you can raise your Zoom hand.
Okay. Doesn't sound like anything right now. I would like to talk about the goals. And, so for the first time, we said that the committee is recommending that Harbor Springs increases its total number of year-round residents and strives for a balanced age structure within the median, with the median age more in line with the states. So this is the first time, I think that this is appeared in any master plan, but I wanted to get the planning commission's thoughts on, is this a valid goal? Is this a smart goal? It never was a goal of the zoning. And this is the first time we're seeing it in any master. How do people feel about the need for year-round residents, their value? Is this something we should work to accomplish?
Yeah, I mean, I think it helps, obviously, businesses have a year-round presence, so I think increasing it would be great. It's just, how do we increase it? It seems like obviously affordability is a problem, so until we solve that problem, and then also, you know, with the rentals and then people just acquiring for vacations, it's hard to.
So housing immediately jumps up as a hurdle.
Well, that's a good point, because our housing goals don't directly say that, but they kind of indirectly say that so for example, the housing goal in the master plan says, new housing will need to address the full economic spectrum of people who live, work here. So we're talking about providing housing for people that live and work here. That's under the assumption that a lot of people who work here don't live here. They live further away. Part of those tactics in some of the objectives there also included will provide housing opportunity to the broad spectrum of persons seeking housing in the city. So it's not a direct goal in here, but it's kind of gleaned from the goal that we have, and that we want people who work here to be able to live here. When we don't want the people who live here currently to leave, so that by necessity means that the population will increase.
So we've lost, depending what data you look at, we've lost between 300 and 400 residents over the, since the year 2000. And so how do we agree that we should try to gain back some of those?
Well, isn't that pretty much what the new zoning ordinance intended? I mean, a lot of the changes that we made, that was one of the drivers in my mind to make things, to increase opportunities, to make things more accessible, and to maybe help with pricing, provide more options. So I think we're already going down that road in a significant way, which I think is very important, and aligns with this, I think, very well. But it doesn't mean we can't do more.
I think it would be good to state it more clearly in the master plan. I think that's a fault of the master plan, that it's not stated more clearly. I think year-round residents are a necessity if we're gonna have a sustainable town. If we really want a town, a city, I think we have to have year-round residents. Which, unless we want to kick seasonal residents out, which is not what I'm saying to do, it means the population should increase somewhat. And I think they're a necessity. I don't think it's an option, but I do think we need to state it more clearly in the master plan.
And I think we need something more. I think we need some kind of incentive, like tax incentive or something to bring. Because I think what we're starting, it's great, but I think it's just a drop in a bucket as far as flag lots. How many flag lots are we gonna be able to develop that, assuming that somebody's gonna want that on the property?
duplexes, how many duplexes are we're gonna build, that's already we're already built out right now. So I think what we're doing is a great start, but it's a drop in the bucket, but I think if we're really gonna kind of tip the needle, we need something more, some kind of incentive. to That's a bring good people. point, because at our RC committee, one of the last things on our agenda is to talk about incentive policies, and we talked about incentives at our last meeting, we're flushing through those, so that's next, that'll be coming to you guys next.
Well, I think the other thing too is, in the zoning code, looking at multiple residential. More multiple residential rather than single family homes or duplexes, because truly, in terms of more affordable housing, you have to have more density in a place. And we hardly have any multiple residential in the city at all. I mean, there's no place you can put an apartment building or a fourplex even, really. So I think that's something down the road that we need to look at.
Tony, do you have any thoughts on year-round residents? Do we need them? Do we want them?
Oh,
Do you want a certain number?
of course, we need your residents to have a viable town. We're not an amusement park. So we have to have that. I just struggle with how we can change the market dynamics to get there.
Well, I guess that's step two. Let's, make sure that we're in sync with the goal here. And then, if that's the case, then yeah, we probably ought to take a look at the master plan and talk about that. And then,
We
Let's
need
see if
more
there's
emphasis on community and long-term, because right now, we mostly emphasize, we've got water, we've got skiing, we've got boating. We're asking people to come here and buy a summer residence so that they can enjoy this stuff. We're not trying to get people to come here and live here. So somehow we need to shift things, because they look at us as a resort town, they don't look at us as a town to live in. So we need more emphasis on that part, what we have in the community, what we have and why we want more of it and why we welcome more people. We've got a great education system. Bring your kids here. Don't talk about the boats, because that's just gonna bring more summer people. And, if we can get 63 more units by getting rid of short-term rentals, that would be available for people if you're full-time.
But we need to look at what the I agree with you, Rick, we need to look at what the master plan says. Count the number of times, views and recreation and resort are mentioned as opposed to year-round housing. I mean, if you want to sit down and count words in a document. And so we need to switch that balance, or at least bring it more into balance.
Yeah.
So we have something to base our decisions on.
A town logo doesn't promote living here full-time. It's all outdoor stuff.
or you could live on that sailboat.
Not in January,
Well, you could, but if
but yeah,
All right.
we're,
So, Vanessa, you have any thoughts on full-time residents and?
She was part of the.
Yeah, number 4 is.
Okay, so you agree. I think this is such an important topic. I'd like to open it up to folks in the room to comment on this if they'd like to. Folks online, do you have any thoughts on? Do we need full-time residents, and should we try to get more? Should we try to get less? Should we try to? Yes, ma'am. Could you introduce yourself, please?
Sure, Bill. Ann Porchinsky, 465 State Street. So yeah, we need more full-time residents. Our houses aren't pretty at all. And in my job, I have the interesting opportunity to meet 2 to 3 people a week who are moving back to Northern Michigan for a bunch of reasons. Some are because they have family roots here, but another big motivation for them is they've been living in Florida for the last 20 years and they don't want to live there anymore. And they've been living in Arizona for the last 20 years and they're crying, they don't want to live there anymore. So they're coming back to Northern Michigan because rumor has it, we have clean water, the weather's pretty nice, people are pretty friendly. And these are folks, the ones I'm meeting, who have the budget, the lifestyle, the character, the attitude, the budget to buy houses in Harvest Springs. Why are they all buying in Queen City? So that's my question. Why does somebody who's moving back to Northern Michigan want to spend the rest of their life here, probably going to attract their kids and grandkids here over the coming years? why are they choosing Wayne City and not Harbor Springs? Because really often they say, well, it came down to, it's gonna be Wayne City or Harbor Springs, and we chose Wayne City. And one of them, in fact, got so serious about living in Wayne City that he's not gonna be on their planning commission in the coming future. So if these are folks that, you know, would like to live here, would like to make a contribution to our town, why aren't we wooing them? Why aren't we making them eager to come live next door to us? And another point is, I've also noticed, because I work in McLaren, that I bump into healthcare providers who would love to move and could afford to move to Harbor Springs. But if I understand it correctly, the hospital won't let them because we are a couple of inches outside the hospitals where our providers have to live zone, so they can get there in a certain time. I don't understand the details exactly, but many providers have to live within a certain distance of the hospital. And so we are just outside that range for the hospital. And I wonder if the hospital administration could be wooed, or if that's some kind of, I don't know, regional or federal law that requires a provider to be so close to the building. But if it's not, could we extend our something, open arms, to people who are in the healthcare profession so that they could live over here instead of Charlevoix and Wayne City?
It's my first thing, I thought you were gonna say extend the city boundaries.
Name is on the off-field pavilion, whose name is up on East Bluff.
Gents?
Brian Nolan, I don't live in Harbor Springs, I live in the township, Village Traverse. Am I allowed to address the board?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Many do.
There's
I'm sorry, could you repeat?
no federal law or state law that says physician has to be within so many miles, but there may be a hospital bylaw.
Oh,
That's it, but it's not a state.
Okay.
It's just a question about the underrepresented items like tattoo parlor and piercing place and thrift shop and all that. Is that considered a deficiency or just, I wonder how that list came up of underrepresented. We don't have a strip club. I guess the question is, you know, is that considered underrepresented? I'm just wondering how that list was formulated.
So yeah, we thought about all the different things that potentially go into a typical city, typical town our size, and we noticed a lot of other areas do have these things. It wasn't a statement necessarily that we want them or need them, but they came up in discussion as things that just aren't here. I can see what you're saying is that by saying they're missing or underrepresented, it could lead some to say that we want them, but
We really do want laundromats.
yes, we do.
But if you've got a 70% residency that's over 70 years old, do you need a piercing studio or a tattoo parlor? You know,
I don't think anyone said we necessarily, I don't remember.
Yeah, right. I don't think that it was us to say what we want.
Really, it was just a review of all of the potential amenities that could be out there to a community. And then documenting what ones we have and what ones we don't have. So that you can later then go through the list and say, here are some that we don't have. Do we want to look at goals or incentives to bring them into the community? It doesn't mean that you have to include goals and incentives to bring them into the community.
Okay. Chief,
Rick talked on it a little bit. The schools is a big selling point here. I feel is our biggest selling point besides crime rate, but no, but the schools, I mean, other than that, I don't hear today, like the median house price for Emmett County for last month was like $760,000. It's like, that's a deterrent of itself. I mean, not everybody can afford to come here. And the people who come here are the seasonal people. They're the ones that a lot of them, they can afford that. So I don't know the answer to that. I'd be curious of why people are moving to Point City. I don't know if the pricing market is that much less down there. But I agree with the parameter. They used to have police officers that had a 20-mile requirement, but that's going by the wayside now.
well, let's go to Zoom on the question of year-round residents. Does anybody on Zoom have anything to add on that topic? Should we actively be working to increase our full-time residents.
Oh, we got John
John
Fox.
Fox.
All right, John, you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, sorry, John Fox, 309 Pine Street. Sorry, I on my phone and I messed up the last time, so thanks for letting me speak here. First of all, I like the how you put this together. To me, you know, I've done a number of SWOT analysis, and I think one thing as you continue to work on this document, you'll need to add the threats to any type of decision that is made. But as I hear some of this conversation, it sounds like you guys are working on a master plan document, not on an economic development document. And I'll give you my reasons why, and then I'll give you my ideas about, you know, residency. So from the housing side, you know, housing is an issue not only in Harbor Springs, but it's in Emmett County. It's in many, many localities. And when I start to think about employees and what employees go through with their employment and their commute, typically an employee is going to commute probably 30 minutes or less. So I'm not sure that while housing can be stated as a challenge, I'm not sure what a goal would be. Again, because you have the opportunity to pull residents or pull employees probably from 30 minutes or less. And that's really driven on what businesses are here. Are they attractive for people to come here and work? Right. So that's the first thing I wanted to mention. I'm going to come back to the schools. But the other piece I wanted to talk about was the demographic portion. Again, I'm not sure why that is in an economic development. I heard, Victor, what you said in terms of the age of an employable person. But again, if you put down that as a goal, what are your actions to get there? Right. And to get to an average age, quite honestly, anywhere less than where we're at. First of all, baby boomers are going to start to move to their next journey. That average age is going to come down. But to do these types of things that I've heard, we're talking about changing Harbor Springs from what it is today. Because if you eliminate, call it short-term rentals, you bring average age down, you're another city in Michigan. You're not a resort city. You're not Harbor Springs. So that's an opinion. I would just say I'd be cautious on this document. And that's why it sounds like to me, you're talking about a master plan. The other piece is from an economic development side, you know, June, July, August, September. Hey, I've been there the past 2 weekends in a row. Town's been busy. Where I see the issues are November through April. And what can the city do? Maybe it's develop an event a month. How do we bring people into Harbor Springs? And this is probably more short term because some of these ideas you're talking about are probably more long term that would help drive some revenue for people this winter and next winter and spring and so on and so forth. So those would be some of my recommendations. And again, from a seasonal versus full-time, quite honestly, you eliminate short-term rentals, you have nowhere for visitors to stay and people will stop coming because you don't have hotels. The hotels will be in Petoskey and you're just not going to have the same amount of people that will want to come visit here. That would be some of my comments, and I wholeheartedly agree with the technology thing. I think the more you can boost that, the more you're going to get people to come here and spend time here and they know they can work. So sorry if I jumped around a little bit on that, but I wanted to hit a couple of those topics. Oh, the last one I wanted to hit, schools. I don't know the quality of Harbor Springs schools. My girls didn't go to school there. But if I'm someone that's looking to buy a house in Harbor Springs and I go to Zillow, each of you should do it because you'll see the rating of the Harbor Springs schools. It might not be fair. It might not be reality, but it's a 6 out of 10. And when I moved back to Michigan from California, I chose Rochester, Michigan, because the schools have a phenomenal reputation and they're a 9 out of 10. So that might be something that one committee needs to work on to say, how do we get a fair representation of what our schools are to anybody that's looking at buying a house here and moving here full time? Because if you're looking for a full-time resident around 40 years old, they're going to have children and they're going to want to ensure the schools have a quality education. Thanks for the
Well,
time. I
that's
took longer than I
a
should.
representation, because the state gives our school a grade every single year, and we are in the higher 90s every single time. So I don't
like I
know how
said,
Zillow goes about doing that, or even how we can get better represented, but based on the state, we are one of the.
But I get it, but again, people don't always go to the state. If they're looking for a house, they're going to go to Zillow. So maybe there should be a group or a committee that says, understands what is Zillow grading, and then how do we ensure we get fair representation on Zillow? Because not everybody's going to go to the state ratings and look. So,
Thank you, John.
Yeah, thanks, Jen.
Yep. Thank you.
I guess say one thing from the city's perspective, when it comes to employee and housing, why it's kind of important. Why this is all tied into economic development. We have about 30 full-time employees. We have one now that lives in the city limits. Our officers, we're pulling them from, some of them were living in Petoskey apartments all the way on the other side near Walmart, and they just found something reasonably in the area. So how are we going to attract employees to work here and service this community if there's not the housing for them, and their police officers shouldn't have to, if they need to respond, drive 25, 30 minutes, they should be in the community. And also, how are we going to address who's going to serve an Asian community if you don't have, people from the area? Like, so who's going to work the streets, the water? Like, some of our guys live a half an hour plus away. I mean, in our department. So it's not. I think it's also coming to why I support economic development, because if you don't have the support system here, the housing and the employees here, then your economy's gonna fall apart. I mean, it can't just be supported by no one. So I think that was part of the reasoning in the committee, is like, that's why housing and year-round population is very important, because and I think I'm comfortable speaking on behalf of the committee when I say that. It's an opinion, but I think it's an opinion that they researched and talked about a lot.
Well, it sounds like we're in agreement then that full-time residents are desirable, that we could benefit from an increase of some amount. Nobody's put a number on that. I don't know that makes sense to do that. And so, all right.
Well, I guess we can get projects and tactics. We'll kind of talk about, people have been asking about, well, how are we going to do? Here's the goals. How are we doing? So maybe we review some of the project and tactics that'll give us some ideas about, what we're actually doing.
Why don't we move into that?
So planning and policy. That's the first category. One is to develop a business recruitment and retention program. So, a year-round economy depends on businesses that can thrive year-round. So we highlighted that DDA really emphasized that too when I brought this to DDA. Incentivizing property owners to upkeep their properties. Incentives can be a tool to encourage property owners to help achieve our goals. So the city, and especially the DDA, could consider financial incentives for the downtown properties. One thing we talked about is providing professional architectural assistance to downtown building owners. We talked about the historic charm, the character. Well, I think that's important to a lot of people. And one way to do that is to say, hey, we have this architect on standby that will offer assistance on how you can, modernize or keep your facade in line with the character of Harbor Springs, as an example.
Victor?
Yep.
You've got a typo in number 3, third line down, the last word.
Where to begin instead of being?
Yep.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Rick. Number 4 is a parking program for downtown employees that improves parking experience, and the DDA has some ideas on that too that they've been talking about. And then, of course, becoming an RRC certified community that helps with, it's helped tremendously with our best practices. I mean, we have a capital improvements plan, marketing plan, public participation plan, boards and commission training handbook, economic development strategy. These are all things that these best practices have kind of really helped move us forward. So I think, that's one reason. The other reason is, great, we talk about grants, infrastructure grants, the MEDC and other state organizations give you more points for being RRC certified. And we need to update some of our infrastructure. We need to, talk about revitalizing a building downtown that might be dilapidated. There's money available for that. So that could help us get there. Then we broke down infrastructure. Providing citywide wireless internet is something that is worth exploring. Is it possible? Can we do it? I don't know, but it's something that the committee says we should explore. Collaborate with the DDA and chamber to enhance the gathering spaces that we have already. Orienting Spring Street for more and better pedestrian flow. This is target Spring Street. There's businesses there. There could be, Tom's Mom is on one side. There's other businesses on Spring Street. How do we orient this street to be? It's a connector street, right, from Bay to Main to the Third, to the Bluff, essentially, when you go to the boardwalk. So improving Third Street aesthetically and experientially. And then this was a minor one, but adding appropriate directional signage for public bathrooms. And it's kind of important to businesses because they always get people come in their business to say, well, we want to use your bathroom because they either don't know where the public bathrooms are or they don't want to go all the way down. So something that was brought up was also, I think, in the downtown vision plan in a way. Then programming activities, this kind of also gears toward what, people, events for different age groups, right? So we talk about creating more off-season events. We have plenty of things going on in the summer, but maybe one way to get people to explore here in the winter and spring to want to move here is like, oh, they got these things for families and for seniors and for kids here in the wintertime and in the springtime. Right, we've got bowling on Main, but other things like that. So that's one way. Using cultural recreation facilities for secondary economic development activities such as venues, arts displays, and others. Talk about Ottawa Stadium, right? Using that year round. Programming with the library. So one thing about Harbor Springs is our library is not part of our government. A lot of cities have their library associated with the government. Our library is a private nonprofit. So we don't have that automatic relationship that many other cities have with their libraries. So, collaborating and coordinating with them more for programming. They do a lot of programming and they have events there, speakers, kids, seniors, everyone in between. So I think coordinating with them would be important. Then again, emphasizing promoting different programming that appeals to different age groups. We talk about catering to our current population as well as catering to families and young people. So different age groups have different spending habits, they have different interests. And so ensuring that we have programming that serves all those interests, that would help us be more attracted to, year-round people. But those are some of the project and tactics that we have.
Any comments or thoughts on the projects and tactics? I know that our groups worked on this for months and months. The first thing that hit me though was, wow, this seems like a whole lot of things to bite off at one time.
Well, I guess we're not doing it all at once.
Okay, good.
Yeah, that's not I think, and maybe should be suggested, talked about in the implementation matrix.
Yeah, you can see where things are like ongoing. Some things have already been started, some things haven't.
But
we don't have a
could they be
timetable.
phased or?
Yeah, we didn't create a timetable, so I don't know if we should. It's kind of like our master plan, right? We have a bunch of goals and tactics, but we don't
There's
say.
no timetable.
There's no.
there. You should.
Well, as far as I know, our economic development strategy, just like all our plans, should be reviewed annually. Don't need to be updated annually, but reviewed annually. So I think what we are going to get our direction from on this is City Council, right? City Council is going to say this we're gonna say, here's a strategy, so it comes over like, all right, here's what we want you to focus on.
Yeah.
But that's a good point. There's no timetable. I don't know,
Or priorities, yeah.
no prioritization schedule. Because that could change based on the council. That could change on a yearly basis.
I want to pick up on something John Fox said. He suggested that we maybe add a section for threats. And threats, I guess, could be undesirable outcomes if we don't do something to achieve a certain goal. You know, what's the downside to the city if our year-round population fades away? I don't know. There could be
Well,
some-
here's one. First thing is, who's gonna serve on the planning commission? Who's gonna serve on?
Yeah, that's the most
Well,
important.
who's gonna serve on this? Well, really, who's gonna serve on council? You know, so that's who's gonna keep the city going. You won't have anyone, you won't be a city, right? So there's a certain threat. Sometimes for some boards, it's already hard to get volunteers to, you know, to come serve on. Some boards are more desirable. Some, like the Harbor Commission, have a wider reach. We do allow people from the townships on there. So but some city-specific boards. So that's one, but
That's an example of a threat.
it's an example of a threat that, you know.
So anyway, I would just wonder if the board would like to take a look. Can you identify some threats, or is that even worthwhile doing? Just a thought.
I guess I'm not sure.
I'm not
No,
sure.
no, yeah, I'm not sure how that would be, because what we're looking at an economic development strategy to an action item, right? You're looking at, like, here's where we're at, here's where we want to be.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
John did bring up a point though about the schools, so I looked on Zillow and it does show Harbor Springs as a 6, which it looks like there's a couple categories, and this is like a third party that they use. And it looks like some of the categories are, so this is greatschools.org is the company that uses it for Zillow. And they have like equity for Harbor Springs as a 3, which it should be a 20.
Right.
I mean, so a lot of it is, so this would be something to get to the schools because this is huge. I think that when people are looking for homes, they do look at schools when they're young kids, and that is a big decision maker. So I think getting this fixed is.
Yeah, 'cause that's just wrong.
Yeah,
Yeah, but to figure out how to get it fixed, I
Yeah.
agree.
because
And yeah, when Cassie and our daughter and son-in-law were moving, one of the first things they did was, and they had a 10-day-old
Yeah.
child, and they still looked for school systems,
absolutely.
was where they moved. So
Yeah.
somebody needs to figure that out.
Yeah,
Yeah, somebody needs to figure out why that's happening.
yeah.
It's important for me before I even had a kid.
Yeah, yeah.
Taking this job, and I think, I didn't look at Zillow, so I looked at proper state scores as a little more important, but most people probably are looking at Zillow.
Most people do be more likely to look at.
And I know they don't have like they have certain standards they don't follow because of the amount of money that they receive, so they don't follow everything for the state. I don't know if that has any effect in it, but this definitely needs to get corrected if.
Don't know if that has to be incorporated into our strategy.
No, I'm just
No, it needs to be
saying.
communicated. It needs to be communicated.
Yeah,
to this. Maybe they know, but it should be.
the school board should be concerned.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
school board should be concerned
Maybe
about
they
it.
should. The real because.
Why not, why?
And there's one other thing I'd like to raise as a tactic, and that's the idea of re-emphasizing our attractiveness to remote workers.
Yeah.
So we have a couple of remote workers at this table. Chris Heiner's here. He and I have been talking about, he's a remote worker who just moved to the community. And so these are people that come with good jobs, with benefits, and they bring their jobs with them. There's no environmental impact, there's no factories or, you know, anything like that. And they are, you know, it used to be a crazy thing, now it's a normal thing. And there's an unlimited pool of high earning people who are full-time. Some might have 2.5 kids. And, you know, there's no reason our town couldn't be the very best place in northern Michigan to be a remote worker. We've got co-working space, we're gonna have better internet. And,
Or we'll all be at Bill's house.
yeah, and, we could do, an amazing, promotional thing to attract remote
So-
workers.
So we could marketing and incentivizing remote work.
Maybe not even incentivize.
Well, here, we talked about a little bit of this at the RRC committee, because we were talking about this. And, I used to live in Vermont, and Vermont had a very similar issue with, it was very heavy on retirees because people from New York, Massachusetts retire, have their second home in Vermont. So what the state offered for people to come work remotely was a $10,000 moving bonus, like you come to Vermont, work remotely, we'll pay you $10,000. Not saying that's something we could do, but there are potentials, incentives that, you could do to attract people.
But even short of that, I mean, we could be an extraordinarily welcoming community. If you're considering moving here to be a remote worker, we'll have a concierge that'll set you up a meeting with the mayor, with the school board chair, with, if you're into fishing, we've got two great guides that can talk to you about that. If you're into trails, we'll get a meeting with the Trails Council for you.
I think can you condense that into?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think
No,
that's kind of mentioned, because we've got stuff about promoting different programming.
Well,
And I think it's kind of, wouldn't that kind of cover some of that?
I think programming is more for like events, the stuff that we're doing.
I think that's a great idea, Bill.
I think it's a good idea.
Certainly what attracted us here was remote work.
Yeah.
If
You
we
make you
can-
feel appreciated and special
Mhm.
if you have something. Also, it doesn't add to the traffic because you're not commuting to work. So for the city itself, it would be a plus that there weren't extra cars on.
If you're all on board, maybe Bill, you can think of some language that you can just shoot over to me.
Can I,
Yeah.
are you taking?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, Chris Manner, it's like, as a remote worker, I want to say that the schools were one of the number one things that attracted us here. And my wife is from here originally, so we have family here, we visited frequently, so we did not look at Zillow, we just knew the schools were great. She's also a teacher, she's now trying out some different positions within the district. So that was a main attractor for us. The other challenge is housing. That's part of why I came to this meeting, and I'm really interested in this new zoning ordinance. I think a $10,000, program to attract workers, that wouldn't have moved the needle for me. It took us quite a while to find a house to buy in the first place. And increasing the housing stock, I think. Even just more ADUs and things like that. So a young family or a single remote worker can get a foothold here. Those are the biggest things, I think. So I agree with so both of those things helping more year-round residents. And in general, I like to see more density in the city. You increase the housing stock by 3,000 units. That's one less subdivision that went in a farm 3 or 4 miles away. And yeah, you can commute, that's an easy commute, but when it's snowing hard, those people are not gonna come into the businesses in town. And for us, being walkable was another big selling point. We looked at some places in some of the townships, but we really wanted to be able to walk to school, and that's not it's a privilege that was important to us. I know if we can make that a little bit more affordable and attract more young families, I feel like that would be.
Thank you, Chris.
Very good points. And yeah, that's why I would add that John Echoangeli's recommendation on housing goal in here, why it's important. Yeah, one of my experiences similar when we moved, we're looking for homes here, we end up getting a township because A, price point, and B, the housing stock. It was a combination, and I moved here before the significant increase in prices, and it was just, we really wanted to be in the city limits, but we just couldn't find anything at our price point that was met our needs. So I think it's important for, there's people, all varieties looking to, move here. You have retirees, young professionals, families, and they're all looking for something different. They're all at different points in their lives. And I think we recognize that with the zoning code that we put in place for more options. I think that's a great point that you made, is it's not just the price, but it's what's there, you know, what options are available for people. And I think Nancy also talked a little bit about it with, you know, apartment, you know, fourplexes or something like that.
Okay. Kathy,
Kathy Bonchel, 560 Sergeant Street. There was one of the things under infrastructure, we were talking about tactics. Did you only address internet in there? Is it not practical or desirable? Those of us who are in the city that aren't on the city sewer. Is there an economic reason that the city has not? In my understanding, in the last 10 years that I've been here, 13, but anyway, no discussion from what I can tell of whether it makes sense financially. Is it desirable for the streets that don't have to have septic tanks?
We did talk about that a little bit.
We did talk about that, and that got missed because, I mean, I know someone who owns some property over there, and he's sold it twice now, he thought, but he can't because he's not on sewer, and it's a corner lot, and it is just a struggle for people to get what they need to build on that corner lot. And so there's a nice lot wanting to go for sale, but just the way that it works to get the septic and everything, we talked about that.
I mean, I don't know if that affects the ability to develop some of the properties in the ways that we're talking about.
It does, and there's also a desire that some people just simply don't want to mess with a septic field. They truly do want sewer.
I don't want to speak for the DPW, but I have had conversations about some areas in the city with them. And one of the issues of why we don't already have, you know, water and sewer is, you know, just the topography of the community. And in some areas, it would take putting in significant lift stations and whatnot, which would really increase the cost of getting sewer to those areas. And that's probably the biggest hurdle of why we haven't done it already.
But and I appreciate that, but I also know that we've talked at some points about the cost. Because we have the septic, there's still the issue of what to do with the sewage, you know. There's issues with how that's all handled, isn't it? So aren't there, and the cost of that?
Yeah, so
am I missing something?
No, I think you're both right, and that's, Lucas had told me many times that, you know, lift station, you know, is expensive, and that's part of the problem with poverty, but that doesn't mean you can't put it in as a tactic, you know, as a goal, that as a tactic to, because we're talking about infrastructure, and we're talking about having the infrastructure to attract both people and businesses here, and we want to have that. So I have no problem putting that. So
I guess I've had people say to me, so how come there isn't any sewer there? It's like, there just hasn't.
But when you talk about infrastructure grants or low interest loans or zero interest loans from the state, and that's a perfect case of where that could be in here.
It should be mentioned. It would be a good challenge or.
You know, another infrastructure one is sidewalks, expanding where we have sidewalks in the community. You know, if walkability is a big proponent of what people like.
Same thing, no sidewalks on Sergeant Street.
both of those are good.
Yeah, good. So anybody else on Zoom have anything to add at this point? Feels like we're ready to wrap up soon.
And summarize the changes I've heard, suggestions I've heard.
Please do.
Yeah, so all right, what I've heard so far is, okay, so Nancy had mentioned long-term care facility to include that in public services present. Just heard from about sewer expansion and sidewalks related to walkability for infrastructure. Change the word homestead to principal residential exemption, that one category. reword the Bay Street opportunity to. So with the focus on basically rehabilitating and revitalizing the buildings, not so much as adding commercial businesses to the homes. Talk about chamber sponsored events. Rick had a spelling correction for being versus begin. And then Bill would work on a tactic about marketing or attracting or having something for remote workers that want to locate here.
And you were gonna put a housing goal in.
Yeah, oh yeah, I did, yeah, I have, sorry, I have that right on mine, yeah, but I just, you guys don't have that. I think that's it, and I mean, I guess another question was that one gentleman said, I mean, do we want to keep piercing tattoo, do we need to keep them in there, does it seem like we want them? Okay, so, I mean, that's what I figure, I don't want to.
What do you highlight?
I
mean, I know what we highlight. I mean, where do we start and where do we stop?
Yeah, it seems like though,
Because
for the
we
most-
started with laundromats. We really did.
Yeah.
And then a couple of others got thrown in.
It seems like though, for the most of the stuff that we've highlighted, most of them were things that we kind of wanted, I mean, or didn't think would affect the community negatively. It's just tattoo and piercing shop, I think it just ended up on there just because we just noticed we didn't have them. But if you look at the other categories, you know, yeah, tea shop, rooftop dining, brewery, distillery. Well, there's our RV park here, that was mentioned too, and I don't know if that's something we want here, but.
I think we did start with a generic list somewhere that just had a list of
Like other
everything. And then you knew
communities.
what do we have and what don't we
Yeah.
have, and moved them from one column to the
Yeah, we
other.
started with a list of.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we could take out things that you guys don't. You don't want us to,
For whatever reason that.
we can talk about maybe at the
Yeah,
RC
Mike,
committee, yeah, we just,
yeah,
yeah.
Hey, I have just one more thing at the bottom of page 4. I just noticed my notes. This is a thing that's never made sense to me, the census data. It talks about our housing units and only 54% are occupied. And I mean, I can't relate that to anything. We don't have, 66% of our homes are unoccupied or vacant or.
You know, when they do the census,
Yeah, this is census data. I've seen it before and it's never made sense to me, but. We know that a third of our homes are essentially year round, 2/3 are not. So, the 54% is confusing.
Should this need clarification that of the one?
I think I don't think we need it as a stat in this. You guys can think about it, check it out.
Yeah, because that does bring up the question, what's the difference between 54% are occupied and only 32% are claimed as a principal residence? I would, immediately kind of bring that question up of those two numbers don't seem to jive.
unless it's just when they do the census, a certain number of the non-homestead people are here.
Right.
So when they knock on a certain number.
When
of
they knock
doors-
on doors.
Yeah, but is that really a statistic that says anything about the city?
And the methodology is people send in their forms, they don't knock much anymore, so it's how you claim, where you live on April 1st.
Yeah,
I wonder if that's,
interesting.
I wonder if that's maybe whether or not there's anybody registered to vote there.
Well, that's.
Because that could be it actually.
Mobile home
because-
park has, they're not homestead.
Yeah, well, because that might be it actually, because the 32% of people claiming their homes as a principal residence exemption does not include renters. So that other 20% could be homes that are occupied by someone as a permanent residence, but they're rentals.
Sounds high for our city, but yeah, anyway, you guys think about it. Figure out what that thing
Well, let's
is.
see, the number of units occupied, just kind of work out this math there, 614. What's the average, what's the population level in Harbor Springs? 11, like 1,200.
Well, you don't have that many
That's
registered
about two.
voters.
To have that many registered voters, that equals 2 to a housing unit on average, so. Otherwise, if
There's-
you're talking, if it's a 1/3 number, you're talking about 300 homes, and then you're saying we have over 3 people per housing unit in Harbor Springs.
Which we don't.
We know.
So anyway, but I see I see your point about taking it off, but I also see Jeff's point about how they could jive. But it is confusing if you're just reading it like it is, that you have one number saying 54%, might need more clarification.
Good, you guys will figure it out, I'm sure. Okay,
Yeah, well,
we have any other comments from the planning commission? All right, then let's close out that agenda item and then we're on to member comments. Any other thoughts that we ought to talk about? If not, then our next meeting is Thursday, November 21st at 5:30. Be back here.